Hello and welcome to today's session on how to create distributed tests with TestComplete. Distributed tests let you perform a variety of useful test activities. For starters, you can perform concurrency tests. So if you have a test that needs to do multiple things simultaneously, distributed tests are a good fit for that. For example, if you want to have multiple users log into the system at the same time and make sure that doesn't crash your application, you can do that with a distributed test. And then there's my favorite application, which is to coordinate multiple tests from the same system. So from your local workstation, you can invoke tests on multiple machines that are in your lab, in another part of your office, virtual machines, or out in the cloud. Now you might be thinking, well, all it sounds like distributed testing is running tests on other systems. I don't need TestComplete to do that. I can launch a test on another system just by walking over to it and clicking the run button. That's not so hard. Well, before you write distributed testing off as pure laziness, let's run through a quick scenario. Here's me, and my boss has just asked me to run a TestComplete test on 3 lab systems. So without a distributed test, the process looks like this, where I walk over to each system and click the run button. Alright, well, you might be thinking, well, that's not too bad, what's the big deal? Well, the next day I go in, and now there are 5 systems that my boss wants me to run tests on. And since I'm not using a distributed test, I have to go over to each one of them and click the run button. Alright, so I've launched my 5 tests, and now I need to keep tabs on each one as it's running. And while this isn't terrible, it's not really a whole lot of fun either. And then my boss says, oh, hey, by the way, Nick, we've added more environments. Can you kick off a test on 12 workstations? And I say, no, I can't. Instead, I'm going to create a network suite in TestComplete and set up a distributed test. And from my master TestComplete workstation, I can kick off tests on any other system that has TestComplete or TestExecute installed. Each of those workstations is going to run their tests and report their results back to the master workstation so I can review the results from all those other workstations from the master workstation. And the great thing here is that the systems that participate in my test can be physical machines, virtual machines, or cloud systems. So no matter how your test environment is distributed, TestComplete will be able to work with it. Alright, so within TestComplete, a network suite test is what allows you to perform distributed testing. And network suites are made up of a number of parts. For starters, there's the master project, which is where you define hosts. And hosts are the computers where you'll be running your tests. This is also the place where you define jobs and tasks, which are the tests that those hosts will run. And it's where you define variables that each one of the hosts that are running the tests can use to share information with each other as they run their tests. Now, the second part to a network suite is the slave project, which consists of tests that will be run as well as sync points, which are places in the test where a host will pause until all the other hosts that are participating in the test reach that sync point. So this is a place where you can say, all right, stop here until everybody's caught up with you, and then continue on. All right, now, this can be a lot of data to take in. So let's look at it from a different perspective. Instead of master workstation, I want you to think Captain Kirk. And instead of host workstations, I want you to think Mr. Spock and Dr. McCoy. Alright, now Captain Kirk has a job for Spock and Bones. He says, Spock, Bones, analyze the blood sample from the assassinated Vulcan ambassador. So Spock and McCoy begin their analysis. And as they do their jobs, they can pass data back and forth as variables. For example, Spock may tell Bones that the ambassador's blood type was T negative, and then Bones can use that information to customize exactly what he's doing during the course of his tests. Now, one of them may also need to wait for the other one to finish a task before continuing on. For example, Spock won't draw blood samples from the dead ambassador until Bones is finished drawing his own samples. And that's the basic concept behind a sync point, where one host will wait until another host has caught up or finished another task. Then once Spock and Bones have finished their jobs, they report back to Captain Kirk on what their findings were. And that's the basic concept behind a distributed test with TestComplete. One machine tells the other machines what tests to run, those tests get executed, and then they report back to that main machine with their findings. So let's review the test scenario we're going to create today. We're going to use the orders tracking application that ships with TestComplete. And we're going to launch the app on two separate systems. On one system, we're going to randomly select an order and delete it. And then we're going to verify that that record was deleted on the second system. All right, so let's see what it looks like when all is said and done. All right, so here we are inside of TestComplete. I've already built out my test and my network suite project. So here you go. You see the slave project has my tests inside of it. I've got my delete random record, then my verify record deletion test. And then I've already created my master project here. And the master project has a job inside of it that's going to delete a random record. And inside that random record deletion task, we're going to delete a record and then verify the deletion. So easy enough. All right, now, here are the systems participating in my test. I've got two virtual machines that are living locally. I'm using Microsoft Virtual PC for today's session, but you could also use VMware, no problem, VirtualBox, any one of the other virtualization technologies if you're living locally. But you could also be doing this with Amazon Cloud systems as well. So, no matter how your application is set up, you'd be able to do this. And of course, you can also use physical workstations too. So if you've just got a bunch of PCs living in your lab, you could have TestComplete call out to them too. All right, so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to right click on that job and I'm going to say run the random deletion. Okay, now a couple of things are going to happen. We're going to flip over to this network suite tab inside of TestComplete, and it's going to perform what's called verification. And this is where we make sure that we can actually talk to the instances of TestComplete or TestExecute that are running on the other systems. And you can see there we've got those little remote desktop windows on the right side of my screen that are showing us what's actually happening on the systems that are participating in the test. All right, so now here we go. Our tests have run successfully. You can see right here we're marking the test and the system that it ran on. So in this case, delete record was run on this IP address. This is Mr. Spock. And the verify deletion was run on this IP, which is Dr. McCoy. Just like what we get in a normal test run, I can see, okay, overall, this passed. Fantastic. But then, down here, I can see the individual actions that each user was performed. In this case, Mr. Spock launched our orders application, opened a particular file, and then right here, Mr. Spock told us that Susan McLaren is going to be deleted. Okay, great. So now that got performed. All these actions got performed. And then Dr. McCoy tells us that yes, Susan McLaren was in fact deleted. So that name that was chosen for deletion was passed back and forth between Spock and Bones as a variable. And now we can see that yes, in fact, the record that we wanted was deleted. Okay, so that's what this is going to look like when everything is said and done. So now you may be saying, well, that's fantastic, Nick. How did you get here? How did you actually build this test case? All right, let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so when you first start out, your project structure is going to look something like this. You probably have a project suite and then one project inside of that, which contains all the tests that you've created. So the first thing you need to do is add the network suite capability to this project that actually contains the tests that you've created. And the way you do that is you just click on this advanced node right here and say add new item. And then you're going to choose network suite. All right, and that's all you need to do for right now. Okay, so that's part one. The next thing we need to do is create a new project inside our project suite. And this project that we're going to create will be the master project that drives the other systems. So we're going to right click here again and say add new item. We're going to create a new project, and I'm going to call this the master project. And remember, this is like Captain Kirk, so we'll call this master project Kirk. Okay. Now our master project Kirk has been generated. We want to make sure that Kirk has the network suite item in him as well. So again, we'll say add new item and we'll choose network suite. Okay. Now inside the network suite, the first thing we want to do is define the hosts that we're going to use in the test. So we need to define the systems that will actually be running our test cases. So we'll just right click here and say add new item, host 1. Okay, host 1 is going to be Spock. I'll double click on Spock, and now I can put in the IP address or the DNS name of the Spock system. Now, because the virtual machine isn't actually connected to my network, it doesn't have a DNS name. So I'm just going to fill in the IP address for that system. And then same thing with the Bones system. Again, we'll create a new one here. We'll call it Bones. And Bones, his IP address is right here. Okay, so now we've got the IP addresses filled in. The other thing we need to do is provide a username and a password that has administrative privileges for this particular system here. So both these systems have user accounts with Nick, and I'll fill in the passwords here. Okay, now once we've got the usernames and passwords put in, we want to verify that we can connect into the virtual machine successfully. So I'm going to select Spock here and click Verify. And now TestComplete is going to reach out to the Mr. Spock VM and try to log in using the username and password that we specified. And if everything goes well, we get this verification message, and that's good. We'll do the same thing for Bones just to make sure that everything is successful. Fantastic. Okay, so our systems are ready to participate in the test. Save. Okay, now once we've gotten the hosts set up, the next thing we need to do is set up the jobs that these hosts are going to perform. To create those, you just double click on this node here and then right click and say new item. And this is going to bring up the job dialog, and we're going to call this the delete and verify record job. That's really what we're looking to do here. Okay, so now we have our new job. And jobs, if we right click on this panel, you see this brings up a task. Now jobs are made up of tasks. If you think about it like this, imagine that we're going to build a house. Okay, that's our job. We'd want to break that down into smaller pieces so that you wouldn't just build the house. You'd need to dig a foundation, put up a framework, put on a roof, and then siding, and so on and so forth. So each one of those individual pieces would be a task that contributes to the overall job of building a house. In this case, delete and verify record is going to be made up of two tasks. The first one is to actually delete the record, and then the second one will actually be to verify the deletion. Okay, now you can see we've got our two tasks set up, and now we can choose which one of our hosts will be performing each one of these tasks. So here, I'm going to click on the ellipses here, and I want Spock to actually do the deletion. And now what I can do is tell TestComplete about which project we want to run on Mr. Spock, and we do that by clicking here. So Mr. Spock has his own copy of our distributed test project, and so we're going to point him at that and tell him, okay, I want you to use this project for this task. And so I'm just going to browse out to where that project lives. Here it is. It's distributed test slave.mds. And now we've got a few other settings we want to mention here. First of all, copy remote log. This is what's going to happen after the test finishes. Do you want to always push the results back to the master workstation? Or do you only want to do it if there are failures? Or do you not want it to do anything? Personally, I prefer to always copy because that way you always know exactly what happened during the course of the run. Here, what happens after the test is run? Okay, do you want to close TestComplete? Do you want to log off? Do you want to reboot? Do you want to shut down? Your choice, however you want to do it. We'll say to close TestComplete for right now. Tag is just kind of a free-form text description that you can put in here. If there's a little note or something you want to include on this test, you can, but I'm not going to put anything in there for right now. And then test is where we tell TestComplete which test within the specified project we're going to run. So I'm just going to click the Browse button here. And now TestComplete is going to bring up a dialog where I can select the test I'm going to execute. All right, here it is. So now I'm going to expand this guy, and I'm going to run a keyword test, and I want to delete a random record. That's the test that we're going to run. All right, and you'll see here I've also selected to use test execute as my remote application. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for the verify deletion, but instead of using Spock, I'm going to use Bones. and this is going to be the same process going through and filling in the appropriate field. Okay, I fast forwarded a bit. I filled in the appropriate items for the Bones host, and so now we're going to delete the record on Spock and verify that it was deleted over on Bones. Okay, fantastic. So now what we need to do is set up a variable that Spock and Bones can use to share information. Remember, Spock's going to delete a record, but Bones doesn't know which record Spock deleted. So what we're going to do is have Spock put the record that he deleted into a variable and then pass that variable over to Bones so Bones knows what to look for. Okay, now remember, variables are stored inside the master project. So what we're going to do is double click on the Network Suite node here inside Master Project Kirk. And you want to make sure the Variables tab down here is selected. What we're going to do is right click here and say New Item. And this is where we specify a new variable name. We'll call this str customer name. And then we'll click Save. Okay. So now we've got a variable set up. Next thing we need to do is update our tests to use that variable so that Spock and Bones are using the same record. Okay, so here's my delete random record test. And you see what it starts out with is invoking the orders executable. It clicks File Open, loads a particular data file, and then right here it calls this script routine, which is going to programmatically determine what record will be deleted. So let's open that up and take a look at it. Here's that routine right here. And you can see on line 26, I've already set up my Network Suite variable. What this is going to do is I'm setting this value, this variable's value, equal to a random item inside my customer information grid. So if it's Barry Allen in that grid, then we're going to set that variable equal to Barry Allen. And if it's John Steinbeck, then we're going to choose John Steinbeck. So we're going to find a name in that grid and then assign that name into this str customer name variable that we created. Okay, fantastic. Now, in a similar vein, if we go into the verify record deletion test, you see here we're going to launch the orders executable, we're going to open that same file, and now we want to verify that that record was deleted. So again, we'll come back into our script routine, and we're going to go down to this method right here. And what this is doing is it's going to loop through all the rows in our grid to make sure that the name that we selected, whether it's John Smith or Barry Allen or whatever, is not present. And we do that right here on line 42. We're looking to see if that item's text, if the item in the grid, equals the customer name that we saved off earlier. So that's how we can use that inside our test cases. Alright, so now that we know that the data is being passed back and forth successfully, we need to set up a sync point. Because right now, when this job runs, you'll notice we're going to run simultaneously. So Bones may be trying to verify that an item has been deleted before Spock's actually been able to delete it. We don't want that. So what we're going to do is set up a sync point, which will tell Bones to wait until Spock hits a certain point in his tests. All right, now, sync points get created inside the slave project. So you want to right-click here, say Add New Item, and I'm just going to give my sync point a more descriptive name here. I'm going to call this the delete record point. Okay, so now that's in there. And now what we're going to do is use that sync point in our tests. So let's come back to the delete random record test. Spock's going to go through and do all these actions. And it's pretty much when he's done, but before he closes the application, that we want to notify Dr. McCoy that he can go on with his tests. So right after I click this button right here to close my form is when I'm going to have Spock call that sync point. The way we do that is we go run code snippet, pop that right on there, and then the code for this is going to look like this. I'm going to actually just copy and paste that in. It's going to be networksuite.synchronize delete record, and then this 60,000 is a timeout value. So we're going to let Mr. Spock wait for up to a minute for Bones to complete his task at this point in time. All right, so we'll say OK to that. Now, we need to do a similar thing here in the verify record deletion. So what we want to do is have Bones launch the application, but not do anything else until Spock says he's actually deleted the record. So we'll go here again, we'll say run code snippet, pop that on there, and we're going to put that right after the run tested app command. And again, the item we need to put in here is going to be network suite.synchronize, the name of the sync point, and then in this case I'll do 90,000. We'll give Spock a minute and a half to actually perform his deletion. Okay, and that's it. Now we're ready to run this job. So we'll come back here to our master Kirk project. We'll right click and we'll say run, delete, and verify job. So again, we'll call out, we'll make sure that we can talk to both the systems in the test, and then we're going to get the remote desktop windows into those systems, and then the tests will get kicked off. And there you go, you can see our tests were successful. And because everything was successful, we have a happy Captain Kirk. Hope you found this session helpful. If you have any questions, please go to the URL listed on the screen. Thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy automating with TestComplete.